Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where I take you down the rabbit hole into the fantastic world of the strange, the paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen. Come along with me on this week's adventure. And the big topic in the news over the last number of weeks has been, well, you guessed it, Disclosure Day. Of course, there's a brand new Steven Spielberg film that's coming out that's of the same title. Everybody's talking about aliens and UAP. Is it real? Is what the government presenting to us real? Everybody knows that the White House, of course, and the Department of Justice released a load of files, more that are apparently coming this month, about UFOs. So where do we all stand on this? What do we take away from it? That's the conversation that I really want to have today. And to stand, I guess, in the critical thought of an investigator, even when we're standing in the face of this new information, because now that's more important than ever. So we've got an amazing person on today that I just adore. I mean, he's so fantastic, and he's been on the show many times before. Dr. Dean Bertram, who is a freelance writer, he's a filmmaker and a film festival director, originally from Sydney, Australia. He's the co-founder of a night horror International Film Festival and many other things. But the one reason that I really chose him for this discussion today is that Dean actually graduated with a PhD in American Cultural History from the University of Sydney, and his dissertation was Flying Saucer Culture, a Historical Survey of American UFO Belief. And that actually traced and examined the development of UFO belief within the context of American culture and society. So Dean has got a lot to offer, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with him to see what his take is on what we're being exposed to now. Now, interestingly enough, if you guys have not seen it, he's also directed and produced an incredible documentary called The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, and it explores the life and the influence of a very famous sci-fi editor and publisher, Dr. Raymond Palmer, who played a fundamental role, really, in launching the post-UFO war craze. So there's a lot going on here. And recently he explored the Richard Shaver mystery. He's really the perfect person to talk to about all that we're experiencing right now, going forward into this new era of disclosure. Is it real? Is it not? That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so this is a conversation that I have been dying to have specifically with you, because I don't know about you, but I have got so much to say on what the heck is going on with all of this disclosure talk, this alien talk, people's opinions about it. What's going on? Dean, thank you for coming and welcome to the show.
Morgan, it's a great joy to be speaking with you again. I'm so glad that you got that you're doing well again health-wise as well, because I was legitimately worried about you. So it's great to be back.
I really, really appreciate that. I'm glad to be back too, and glad to be doing this, and just is getting back into the flow of everything. And of course, I get back into the flow of everything right when the crap hits the fan, and here we go into just government disclosure and UAPs and all of this crazy thing that was happening. And the last time it wasn't the last time I had you on, but the last time we were discussing this topic was when David Grush had testified in Congress about the whole UAP disclosure thing. And both you and I had reservations about that.
Right. We did, I remember.
Yeah. And, we were at that point, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with the whole David Grush testimony, he was a military personnel, and he was basically acting like a whistleblower. He was coming forward and saying, this is all real. He was making a lot of what sounded like confessions of new information, but then when we broke it down, it really wasn't. There really wasn't a lot of new information that was coming out. It was a lot of safe comments about UAPs and the discovery. Of course, I think the big conversation at that point was this discovery of bodies, and I can't remember how they phrased it, but it was Do you remember that?
Non-human biologics or it's not it's like, what's the term? It's some weird, scientific term like biologics or I can't even pronounce it. I can't even remember.
Yeah.
I should say I can't pronounce it. I can't remember what the term is, but it's essentially saying non-human biological samples, which can mean a whole lot of different things, of course.
Yeah, and of course everybody sort of jumped on board with the idea that he was talking about alien bodies, and because that's how he kind of sold this. And you and I both had a lot of reservations about that testimony, and if anybody's interested, go back in the show list because we did 2 episodes on it. Now in September of 2025, the House Oversight Committee Task Force on Government Secrets, they held a UAP-focused hearing featuring military witnesses, and then in 2026, there was congressional investigators that continued requesting records and videos and so on and so forth. And now it seems like Congress is treating this issue more seriously. What's your take on what's going on right now?
Gosh, it's a difficult place or a difficult area to talk about with any accuracy because
Yeah.
it's very difficult for us to know what the reality behind a potential disclosure is or not. I'm always very suspicious. I think at the most simple level, everybody should be very suspicious, and perhaps the people who should be more suspicious than anybody else are the people who consider themselves ufologists or people within the UFO community. Because if your narrative has told you that for whatever reason you can't trust the government since 1947 on the issue of flying saucers, the fact that you would be eager for the government to tell you the truth about flying saucers or UFOs or UAPs now seems to me to be a very naive way of approaching it. Like you didn't trust them for almost 80 years, and now all you want them to do is essentially tell you what you already believe.
Yeah.
Disclosure isn't, I don't think almost anybody in the UFO community who believes the traditional, Roswell onwards narrative, which didn't even start in 47. This is a narrative which took a long time to build historically and became the predominant narrative of ufology in the 80s going into the 90s. In other words, the fact that there was a Roswell crash and the government had bodies and the government was in some type of secret treaty deal with extraterrestrials and there were abductions and there was back engineering or reverse engineering of all these, recovered UFO crafts. All of this stuff was a fairly new, it seems to me new because I was interested in it then. But, it's something which really sprung up about halfway through the history of ufology. But most people in ufology today tend to believe that history, that it all starts with Roswell and, moves forward. But I think most people who are in the disclosure movement or eager for disclosure, they just want that story told to them. They just want the government to tell them everything you've believed is true. Yes, we recovered a craft at Roswell. Yes, there are little grey aliens. Yes, they're abducting people. Yes, we have the sources, in a secret base in Area 51. That's literally what the disclosure movement wants. Now, to me, I'm skeptical of most of those narratives which have fed into the current UFO belief system. It's not that I necessarily don't think there isn't an anomalous phenomenon or phenomena, because it might be more than one thing being conflated as one. It's not that I doubt that people are having all kinds of experiences, everything from sighting objects in the sky that they can't explain to having encounters with beings or intelligences which don't seem to be human. I don't doubt that. What I doubt is a history which is, we could talk about forever how it formed, but there are all kinds of reasons to be suspicious of the traditional historical narrative that UFO believers and many ufologists have written about or believed or subscribed to. So my problem with the disclosure movement is I can't see them really wanting to find out the truth about what UFOs are. What they want is, again, to be validated for what they already believe. And that assumes a lot of things. It assumes, for starters, that your narrative is historically correct.
Right.
So you already know what the government are going to tell you if you buy into that. They're going to tell us that they have sources that they captured at Roswell. I already know that. But let's just assume for a minute that historical narrative is incorrect. And worse still, and we could certainly get into this at some length, that much of that historical narrative was probably created intentionally and likely by various intelligence departments within the US military, right? Or in the US intelligence services. So if that's the case, And if the government might have, or parts of the government might have, because the government isn't this one big block like we like to think of it. It's all these different agencies often working, with very different motivations. And even within some agencies, there's different motivations, right? So, but just to assume that your narrative is correct and that you're going to hear your narrative back, to me is problematic because I don't believe that narrative. I have no reason to believe that narrative. So that makes me even think, does the government really have anything it can tell me? If it didn't just imagine for a minute, if it didn't catch a down saucer in 1947, if there was no ET human alliance like it's talked about, if there is no definite proof of physical alien abduction, although I do think people have experiences, then what's the government got to tell us anyway? It's certainly not going to, if it tells you your narrative, and I'm not saying yours, Morgan, but a ufologist narrative who believes that kind of, quick wrap up that I did, if it tells you that, then I don't think you're being told the truth anyway. You're just being reiterated the same message which was sent to you in the MJ-12 documents, which we know was a fabrication, in the Paul Benowitz affair that we know was a fabrication, in the initial Roswell book, which was written, or at least one of the authors we knew was an Air Force intelligence asset. William Moore confessed that he was, right?
Right.
So you're just being fed back the narrative which the US government started to popularize in the late 70s throughout the 80s anyway. But maybe they don't have any of that data. Maybe that was just spin for whatever reason I don't even understand. So I'm not sure what there is to find in disclosure. I'm not sure what the government knows. So that's, I get, and I know that was a long answer to a short question, but that's one of the reasons I think it's so difficult to even talk about what they might know or what they don't know, because I'm suspicious if they know anything, to be totally honest.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a couple of things that I think are important. And number one is that confirmation bias. I think that's something that we really, really need to consider. Because if you've got confirmation bias, you usually don't know you have it. You're willing to dig your heels in and kind of accept the narrative that's being presented if it's agreeable to what your belief structure is. So there's the psychology there of confirmation bias. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on, that you made a really good point there, which is not only is the government broken up into different segments, but it's also broken up into different levels. And I think that's one thing that people really need to consider, is that not only are we dealing with different segments of disclosure, maybe one agency knows something that another doesn't, but there's levels upon levels upon levels within those agencies. And I think the idea that suddenly we're just going to get all this information dumped on us, on like civilians, about things like, not only black projects, but the deep black projects, when even the higher ups within the black projects don't know and don't have access to those, is ludicrous to me. I just don't think that's what's going to happen here. And like when I took a look at the initial file dump that the White House came out with, and I haven't been through all of it obviously, but I've been through a chunk of it. I'm not seeing anything past what you or I would have discovered if we just did some research. Is that what you've found also?
Absolutely. In fact, there's lots of things in there we can touch on very quickly. The NASA photographs, which were meant to be this incredible revelation, were lower res versions of photos you can already get on, public university websites. And the images that some people were saying, well, there's an anomalous light in the sky in this photo on the moon. In the higher res photos, and if somebody who actually knows what they're talking about analyzes, I was watching a podcast the other day, which was very good, and one of the analysts his background was just in analyzing literally astrophysics type photos and, astronaut type photos and NASA mission photos. He'd already seen them all. And he said, well, that light in the sky, let's zoom in. And now let's zoom down to the crater in the moon right next to the astronaut's foot. Oh, it's an identical light there. And let's zoom over to the film on the side of it where, it's actually the strips of the film. Oh, there's an identical light there too. It's just a film emulsion error. So, of course, if you've got this big black sky taking up half of the thing and there's a weird light, but you can also find an identical light in the crater next to the astronaut's foot and over in the side of the film itself, then it's probably a film emulsion. So all of that, all the NASA photography was a nothing anyway, because it had already all been released and there was nothing there. And then much of the documents had already been released, admittedly some of them in redacted form. There was nothing new there. The videos that were released, unlike those Tic Tac videos which blew up, the conversation in 2017, these videos didn't have any of the actual the data specs on the screen. Like normally when you look at a military camera, it's got like, all this, the velocity, the plane was traveling, the time of day, all these different statistics. They were all erased. And things which the media obviously jumped on because they looked impressive, most noticeably the alleged star in the sky. Like there's this thing which looks like a diamond or a star. A star is the wrong expression. It looks like a big diamond floating in the sky. And people were going, what was? That's not ours. Well, again, I was lucky enough to watch the podcast, even though I was already suspicious of the guy who this is literally his bread and butter, analyzing things like that. And he's going, there's no doubt that that's just the afterburner of a jet that's being followed. Like it's just a camera anomaly. Like if you hold your iPhone camera up to a bright light, you'll get lines going out vertically, diagonally, horizontally. This is just the type of the FLIR imagery capturing something even more distinctly. So you're not what you're seeing and you think is actually something that looks like this weird diamond or Christmas tree ornament. That's literally just an anomaly of the camera being overexposed to afterburner from behind. And he went through multiple videos, and none of them, which were being analyzed, were anything impressive. So again, the data drop has been a nothing. I'll just quickly, because it interests me, what I find fascinating in the data drop was references to Raymond Palmer and Richard Shaver, who I've obviously been making a documentary film about for some time. And the funniest one is, and we probably don't have time to talk about the Shaver mystery, but we've talked about it on your show before, is the FBI got an anomalous, not an anomalous, it was anomalous, but an anonymous telegram. Or it was the Department of Defense or the Army back in the day. I can't remember which department now. It got pushed back and forth between the two anyway, of somebody saying regarding a UFO sighting in a Chicago or an Illinois area where Richard Shaver was living at the time. And this is in the first UFO document drop, saying you should investigate Richard Shaver. He might know about these sources. He lives near there. And of course, the great irony is, and the FBI say it in the file. So they literally, I think, goes back between the military and the FBI. This anonymous telegram, and then the FBI go and they interview Shaver, and they come back with the conclusion. This whole flying saucer thing seems like it might have been invented by Richard Shaver and Raymond Palmer to sell their magazines and their stories. And probably no truer words have ever been said, at least to the extent that Palmer and Shaver had laid all of this belief system. Yeah. So reading that in the first, and I was already aware of the document. I'd seen it in unredacted. I'd seen a redacted version before, but to see it unredacted was a lot of fun to read that. That was great.
Oh my gosh, it's funny, like when you dig into some of this stuff, just even what you're describing is really basic stuff in paranormal research that if you're a good investigator, this is what you're looking to debunk. If you get a photo that somebody's claiming there's a ghost in it, or whatever, the first thing you're looking for is things like light anomalies, reflective surfaces, how is the camera skewing the image, creating something else, all sorts of different things that you're looking at just as a basic researcher, sort of picking this stuff apart. And I think what you're really bringing up here too is just how deep our confirmation bias really can be if we really, 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 really want something. Because I know, in this particular instance, and just for the audience, the Pentagon's Arrow has been continuously investigating UAP reports, and they've been one of the major groups releasing this information. So that's the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, for those who don't know. And they state that their official statement was that they had examined thousands of these cases. They continue to receive reports. It's been sponsoring the scientific workshops focused on UAP data collection and so on and so forth. But never, at least from what I can see, have they ever found evidence of extraterrestrial crafts. They're not stating that,
right,
from what I can deduce from it. Just for the audience, I definitely believe there's anomalous things out there and crafts out there and stuff like that. I am a believer in aliens and things like that. There's no way to me that we're by ourselves in this universe. But I think what Dean and I are trying to get across is the fact that we have to be really, really careful about any sort of narrative that sounds so fantastic without really sort of taking a step back and remembering how to investigate what we're being presented. And it just even the little things, Dean, like what you're talking about with these photos.
Yeah, I think that most people won't bother to take the time to get to do that additional research. We were talking before the show about generations of people that are kind of dependent upon the mainstream media for their news, and they believe what they see. So if they see a Fox News report talking about this miraculous Christmas tree-like ornament in the sky, or a CNN report saying the same thing, they'll go, wow, there really is something in these new videos. This is extravagant, or extraordinary. But if you go and you research it and you think about it and you talk or listen to people who actually do the analysis of this type of imagery for a living, then you realize it isn't really anything anomalous at all. The problem's already been solved. But because of the way that most people today, including myself, including all of us, I just happen to have more of an interest in the UFO topic, so I probably dig deeper than I might in another story. But we're all used to hearing these sound bites, and that the media is going to choose things which are super sensational to put on the screen and focus in on things which fit, and that doesn't mean even anything conspiratorial. It just means a news director wants to show something cool on the nightly news, which is going to make people keep watching for the next 30 seconds instead of changing over to, I don't know, a soap opera or the wrestling or another news channel, right? So I don't think a lot of this even needs a conspiratorial bent to explain it. It almost needs, and I know this is your wheelhouse, it almost needs a psychological analysis to interpret how people perceive this, and not just people like at a grass level, like the news desk editor or the person who's in Washington being said, okay, get the UFO files out. They're looking for things to send out, right, in whatever department. Like, so a lot of this can be explained away, I think, and it doesn't mean that there isn't some government conspiracy. It doesn't mean there isn't, but a lot of this stuff can just be explained away, I think, psychologically, to be honest.
Yeah, what I think is interesting too is what hasn't been said in some of these files. Like, for example, the alien bodies question. Remember the one episode that we did? There's a whole just frenzy around the recovery of bodies. Like, there was the incident in Mexico, and there was there was so much going on when we last talked about this, and that question, interestingly enough, seemingly has gone quiet, which I find rather interesting. I mean, we'll see here. There's supposed to be some other big file dump this month, I guess, that they're going to be talking about aliens and photographs of the actual beings or something like that. But I find that very fascinating, is that all of a sudden, the one big question that was being tossed around so profusely before is now like, where is it? Like, where is it? I mean, you've still got certain whistleblowers that are talking about it, like I think Dr. Stephen Greer's talking about it, and there's been a couple of, I think Bob Lazar talked about it. I haven't seen S4 yet, his documentary, but there was but there's been a few people that have talked about it, but there has been nobody in relation to the government disclosure itself that I've seen that has been aggressively addressing that question.
Yeah, it'll be interesting if they get to it. Again, I don't think they have anything. But one of the early documents, which is in that first file dump, actually, I'm trying to remember who it was, because it's a high up Air Force general from the time who actually, I think's even, talked about being a member of MJ-12, or certainly aware. And there's a memo from him going, well, until we get some type of one of these crafts crash, we're not going to know anything about them. And this is post-Roswell. So he's either lying in an internal memo, and maybe a ufologist would say, well, yeah, he's lying, or that they really didn't know what was going on. And I think it's far more likely that they didn't know what was going on. That said, getting back to the Greer position and the talk of alien bodies that you were just mentioning, one of the things I've noticed, and I'm really curious just to see how this plays out as an observer, is something that was happening, and I might have mentioned it last time we were talking about disclosure, we were talking about the government hearings. It's something that my ear pricks up every time I hear, is multiple people within the disclosure movement, so Grush would be an example of that. People who were pushing really hard for it, like Tom DeLonge of To the Stars Academy, who used to be the frontman of Blink-182 and is still the frontman of Angels and Airwaves, has said it. Leslie Keane, one of the New York Times writers who wrote that original New York Times front page article in 2017, which kind of made this whole topic, media presentable, or at least it wasn't, an area of shame anymore. So Keane said it. Other journalists have said it who are observers on the sideline. Tucker Carlson certainly said it. And the list goes on and on. J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, has said it. It keeps coming up again and again and again and again. And Hal Puthoff said it, who's another person who's, a big supposed insider disclosure guy. And there's even more, but we'll leave it at that for now. All of these people have said, including Grush, remember, the main whistleblower of the modern era, has said that this stuff is not extraterrestrial. It's interdimensional, or it's spiritual, or it's demonic. And essentially, all of those things are saying the same thing, that these beings aren't from the Zeta Reticuli or from Venus. They're somehow from a space outside of us, and not necessarily outer space, but it interacts with us. And whether you take it from a Christian perspective or a New Age perspective or, some actual, modern physics perspective, the idea that these things are coming through to our reality from another reality, not from another planet or another star system, although conceivably that as well, who knows. That has been something that the media hasn't really picked up on yet, but it keeps being said by people who have been the key players in either talking about this in the media or the key players behind the scenes. Even Ron James, who I screened his Accidental Truth documentary. I think we did the world premiere at a festival I run, Midwest Weird Fest, a few years ago, and he's got a new documentary out. It's an official MUFON documentary. MUFON was all extraterrestrial nuts and bolts back in the day.
Right.
Now even these documentaries are suggesting that it's something else. I don't know if that's caught on, though, outside of people who are either really paying attention or people who are the key players, because I'm curious to see how that will play out, because Donald Trump only the other day, the president was talking in some conference about, we've released all this stuff about extraterrestrial things and people are really interested in it. It's trending as number one. So Trump's still talking about it in an extraterrestrial way, even though Vance isn't talking about it in that way, for example. I know his daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, said that a number of months ago that Donald Trump has a prepared speech about extraterrestrials.
I heard that
he's
as well.
He's just waiting to drop it at the right time. So that's another use of extraterrestrials, even though, again, other people within the disclosure movement are saying something entirely different, including, again, David Grush, the main whistleblower, right? And I'm not saying I trust Grush, but it's just worth noting that he's not like the main whistleblower in this space. And I'm going to segue into the popular presentation of it really quickly. The upcoming film by Steven Spielberg, who probably has done more to popularize the belief in extraterrestrial life than any other filmmaker, in the history of Hollywood, certainly with Close Encounters and E.T. Disclosure Day, I thought maybe he's going to do something super esoteric with it, and he still might have. I know that people have seen advanced screeners. I haven't yet because I'll have to wait with everybody else and watch it on June 12th. I'll be eager to watch it. But the latest trailer dropped recently, and the latest trailer looks like a standard extraterrestrial hypothesis trailer. It looks to me like they're talking about a secret that goes back to 1947, which means Roswell.
Roswell, right? Of course, yeah.
They have imagery which is standard alien abduction imagery. Two kids who are now the two adult leads have both been abducted. Clearly, they're lying on, alien gurneys. They're being examined by grey-looking extraterrestrials. Somehow they remember each other from the craft. Now they're adults. They haven't been friends in the meantime, but they know each other. That story's been told in books from Whitley Strieber on down through various abductee people. I've met people who've told me that story. Oh, I knew him. I never knew him in my life, but I knew him from the craft when I was 10 or whatever.
Right.
These are standard interpretations of extraterrestrial alien abduction, the history I was talking about before about Roswell crashes. And so it seems to me that what Disclosure Day is going to continue that traditional ET popular presentation. But at the same time that I'm like, but all these other kind of insiders and media people are suggesting that this isn't, and the vice president, they're all suggesting this isn't extraterrestrial, but it looks like the main new movie is going to say it's extraterrestrial. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there'll be a reveal at the end of Spielberg's movie and it will be all, oh, it's really demons or it's really interdimensional beings. I doubt it, but I could be wrong. But there seems to be battling interpretations of what disclosure is going to be.
Yeah, now I'm going to be really interested just to see how it plays out from a parapsychology standpoint, because for years there's been this sort of overlap with the idea that this is just an extension of consciousness research, is that this isn't some, extraterrestrial, like, little green men running in from another planet, that this is actually an extension of everything from telepathy to psychokinesis to, are hauntings actually hauntings, or is it something else? Is it some sort of an interdimensional interactivity that's going on? Like, those theories have been thrown around a lot. And it's what I find really interesting, what I tend to lean towards in regards to all of this, is that we're probably dealing with a different type of consciousness, is where I kind of lean towards. And I think that's one of the reasons why people maybe aren't releasing to the extent that they could be releasing it. I mean, there's a lot of people are so deeply just gripped to their beliefs about how the world works. And there's been a number of whistleblowers that I've watched interviews with who, like you were saying, just, high level people who I guess have felt comfortable coming forward, that have said, when I was let in on some of this, it really screwed me up, because it screwed up my perception of how the world works, whether these people were religious, or whether, they didn't believe in, a bigger consciousness. They believe that the, consciousness stems from the brain and maybe not from, it wasn't fundamental to the universe. And that seems to be, like you were saying, it's coming up more and more and more and more. And I kind of wonder, and I'll sort of segue a little bit here into the phenomenon of the missing scientists that have been popping up. That was one of the last tweets of David Wilcock, was, what are people going to do basically when they discover, like, God, unquote, quote unquote, whatever that is for you, is real. And next thing you know, he's gone. So I don't know what there's that aspect of it too, It's like,
Right.
do you think these two things are interconnected? I guess that's the first step to discussing that question. Or the missing scientist connected to the disclosure?
It's hard not to think there's some relationship. Certainly the storyteller in me that wants to instantly make them connected. And they do seem to be connected, because some of these people who've gone missing aren't just, there's like high up people, in intelligence departments who, if anybody would know, they would know. And it's like this weird X-Files episode meets a David Paulides book. It's super weird. I'm not sure how it's connected. I mean, it could be connected. I mean, this is where it gets into all this kind of, supposition and guesswork and narrative story spinning myself. If part of disclosure involves, or doesn't want to involve, the fact that we have a lot of this technology ourselves, not necessarily because we back engineered it, but because it's state of the art, stuff we've been working on that we don't want the Chinese to know we have, or the Russians know we have. And I think in fact, I don't even think I know for a fact that sometimes
Sure.
what it is. There was a CIA historian, not meaning somebody who was an external historian who studied the CIA, meaning somebody who was employed by the CIA to keep historical records. When I was doing my dissertation back in, I think it was the late 90s or early 2000s, he came out with a paper written and approved by the CIA saying, we knew in the 60s something like, high 60% of sightings of anomalous craft were things, that we were testing, like, U-2s and, blackbirds and all these other things. And we were happy for it to come out as flying saucers, because it would disguise, what we were doing, and it wouldn't give, the Russians or whatever info. So we know the CIA were happy to let those stories spin for a period for cover for the US's own, super advanced aerotechnological systems. I certainly know there's enough people within the UFO community who are also interested in our own advanced craft who've come out extensively and talked about many of the triangular crafts of things that we probably have and we're probably testing. So is it possible that something to do with disclosure also crossed over into revelations of our own technology that we didn't want people, and some of these people were in the way of that story and were disappeared? Um, as morbid as it sounds, I couldn't help but when that story broke about the missing scientists, think back on the 1970s book, an English mock documentary, Alternative 3, which imagined that there was this kind of dilemma of scientists who just went missing and where did they go? And it was the weirdest thing. And they'd been taken as part of Alternative 3, which was this program to get Alternative 3 was there was a potentially an end of the world type scenario coming, and Alternative 3 was an alternative to get the elites off Earth onto the back of Mars or something crazy.
Right.
And so they'd been taken, but it was a big deal at the time because it played in England as a documentary and it had as a mockumentary, but a lot of people who just watched it, like I guess Orson Welles' audio broadcast of War of the Worlds 20, 30 years before, they thought it was real, and then there was an accompanying book that presented it as real. And so, but it was all about missing scientists who were somehow involved in, space technology and other things being just disappeared or killed. So this was like all of a sudden Alternative 3, one of the great, is it real or was it fake or was it cover for something that was real stories of conspiracy and UFO lore was literally all of a sudden on Fox News and on all these other news networks. So it's, again, the person who wants to spin the narrative in me wants to go, well, this has got to be connected. But it might be connected in a way we don't imagine. It might be that you want to go, well, these people knew about the aliens, so they were offed. It might be that they had the tentacles of military industrial complex somehow interwove with these people in regards to advanced technologies that we were making ourselves. I don't know. But to answer your question, that was a very long answer. The short answer is I suspect it might be connected, but maybe not in the way that we think that it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something absolutely bizarre going on. I mean, at this point now, everybody's covering the fact that, these poor people are disappearing. And the one incident recently, I can't remember who the last person was to unfortunately, God knows what, and they met, but their phone was factory reset when they found the person's belongings. And it was like, I mean, I don't know how to factory reset a phone, right? Like, I mean, so something's definitely up. And, you brought something up earlier, which I thought was really important, which is the David Paulides research into, of course, the missing 411, with these people that are just up and disappearing. I mean, it kind of opens up a whole other can of worms in relation to that when you're exploring all of these potential possibilities that there's government involvement or perhaps extraterrestrial involvement. I mean, it's that in and of itself is unnerving to think that all of this stuff is kind of interconnected.
You want to be careful what you say in your podcast.
Right?
I'm not even kidding. I mean,
I know. It's unbelievable. Like it's really crazy. But let's talk a little bit about the sort of the narrative that comes down from some of these officials, because I think that's one thing that, I mean, we just, even before the show, we were bitching and complaining about government narratives and all of that kind of a thing. But we've got a really, really long history of manipulation sort of coming down from different areas of government, Canada, states, all over the place, including things like the long history of MKULTRA, which they've said has been shut down. And I'm like, I don't know.
Sure.
But I don't know about that. But that's the official story, is that it was shut up. But interestingly enough, in Canada, there's like a pending lawsuit about it because there was an MKUltra there was an MKUltra program in Montreal that went on for a while. And everybody listening, you guys can Google this. It's a readily available. CBC, believe it or not, actually did a documentary on this and the people who were victims of this program who are now suing the federal government. And so that's still ongoing. But there was this sort of big shutdown from the federal government of like, we're not releasing any of this information. And I'm like, if the program shut down, why is it not okay to discuss it? So there's a whole bunch of things going on around some of these narratives that are pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a problem when you get big government of any kind. In the West, we perhaps in some ways correctly looked at totalitarian governments of the 20th century and been horrified by the things they've done, whether that's the Soviets or the Nazis, and rightfully so. But we've always thought that if a country has a particularly, liberal ideological curve, things are going to be okay. But as Lord Acton, the famous British, I suppose, political commentator and advisor to prime ministers and other people noted once, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So when you get these government agencies, which are pretty much given either by, and they're not even necessarily given it by, the Congress making a law, they just are given money and they're able to go off and do their own thing. And there's no checks and balances. They have as much power as the billion-dollar, multi-trillion-dollar black budget over the years has given them to play with. And in the West, while, don't get me wrong, I love the West. I'm a big supporter of the countries that you and I were either raised in or live in today. And I think the Western liberal values are the only values and the only countries I would want to live in the history of the world. But there's an incredibly dark history of governments in our countries doing, and that's a problem. We start saying governments because that's the term we have, but agencies within the government or subsections of the agencies within the government doing truly hideous things with taxpayer dollars. I mean, things which would be, you'd look at the Nazis or the Soviets and go, yeah, they do that, but we're never going to do that. But there's not oversight of these branches. The fact that we can't identify where billions of dollars of the black budget goes to. And if it lands in a department or a section of a department where the person at the head of that has all kinds of, sociopathic ideologies of his own, we end up with things we know happen. We know things like syphilis experiments happened. We know that MKULTRA happened. We know that they go out and pump chemicals in towns and see what happened, and poison water supplies. And this sounds like something the Nazis would do. It was stuff we were doing in the West. And again, this in a way ties back to the story we were talking about disclosure. The fact that maybe that you haven't trusted your government or sections of your government since 1947, UFO community, I'm talking to you, you're right. But why you would trust them now to tell you the truth? You're delusional. I think one thing I've heard talked about in the disclosure movement, which I think is probably accurate, one of the things is supposedly, and I don't believe this part, but I believe the connecting parts is the US government and other foreign governments as well have all these relationships and interactions with corporations which are they themselves are the broader part of the umbrella of the military industrial complex. So you could list a bunch of, corporations in America that have, have been engaged in studying, aeronautics or other things, and that the secrets that we might be looking for might not lay within the purview of a government investigation. They might be in the vaults of a company or a contractor. And whether that's testing, recovered alien spacecraft, or whether that's building some, device which we don't necessarily want on the public record, but it's shielded in a way because you can't just go to the Congress and, say the Congress can't just go, okay, we're going to, require the Air Force to give us all the details about what's in the hangars of Area, 51 or, Hangar 18 or whatever, because they've been moved off. And I think that's true. I think that part of the disclosure movement, when that comes up, I think that's worth paying attention to, because we all know we know that in a way, while we like to believe we live in a liberal democracy, and to a degree we do, we also live in a fascist state. And I don't mean that in the sense that people who scream fascist at you because you disagree with them mean it. I mean in the traditional way that big corporations and big government are in bed together, and to keep the secrets out of the public record. You just make sure that your government contractors have them, and they're not in the public record anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, just brought up so many really excellent points there, and that's exactly why I brought up MKUltra, because, to me, there's already a long history of one thing that we do know for sure: government lies to us. That's one thing we know for absolute factual certainty, that the odds are that the stuff that's coming out of, and it doesn't matter, like, whether it's a Democrat in office or a Republican in office, I honestly don't think they've got a hell of a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's kind of pointing their finger at Trump or Vance or, well, all these people, and of course in Canada, disclosure has been hush hush. Like, that's the other thing too, is that in Canada, there's nothing talked about here going on. Like, that's all in the States right now, which is, it's just another interesting point. As I say, the only thing that we seem to have going on here is this MKUltra lawsuit from Montreal. But otherwise, it's like there's no talk of disclosure here at all. And when you and in Canada, like, we've got a really deep history into paranormal stuff. Of course, my great-great-grandfather, he was deeply involved in the world of the paranormal and parapsychology and so on and so forth. You don't hear a whole hell of a lot coming from coming from our people. And I think that's one thing that people, like, looking into this, that's the one consistency we've got, is we know that they're not, that they have not been honest. And again, going back to this, like what you were saying with the money, where it's disappearing to and so on and so forth. I actually heard Stephen Greer talking about this on a podcast recently, and he said more often than not, and I think he was using the example of the stealth bomber, and
Right.
he quoted a price for the stealth bomber, and then the bill that was given to the government, the taxpayers, and so on and so forth, was like X amount of $1 billion more than what the plane cost.
Gosh.
So it was like that money disappeared, and then the plane got built, right? And so I think there's a lot of that. There's so much of that going on that I think, like you were saying, being disillusioned by the stuff that's just sort of being dumped in our lap. That's not the end result of this. What do you think people need to be asking themselves as this stuff is coming out?
I think we've already touched on some of it. I think the first question is, do I trust the source that is telling me this anyway? And I
Right.
think you mentioned before too, not to be partisan about it, not to, like, if you're a Democrat, not to go, well, it's coming out under the Trump presidency, so I don't trust it, and vice versa. If it came out under don't base it on your political positions. Base it on the fact that if you're somebody who believes in UFOs, that you haven't trusted the government to tell you the truth for, almost 80 years, right? Why would you trust them to be telling you the truth now? Particularly if all it's doing is, somehow fulfilling your fantasy of what UFOs really are. Be very conscious of what you're being told. Again, particularly if it fits the boxes which are already being ticked. I would say also, just generally, be conscious that even if an experiencer, even if you read a story of an experiencer having, and this is because experiencer tales are the bread and butter of, the paranormal and
Sure.
ufology. You don't have to disbelieve the experiencer to disbelieve what they perceive or what they are told. Like, I often use, and it's a ridiculous analogy, but I use it all the time. It's like if you were a little kid and you were playing outside of your house in the garden or in your yard, and a van pulled up, like a white creeper van, and out of the van went a man dressed like a clown and said, "Hey kid, I'm Funbo the Clown. I'm going to Disneyland. I've got puppies and candies in the back. Jump on in. It's going to be the party of your life," right? You'd be foolish if you were a little kid to jump in that van, number one. Hopefully your parents had warned you of strangers, number two. But if you jumped in that van and Lord knows what would happen to you at the hands of Funbo, and you somehow either Funbo released you or you escaped, and you told your parents, Funbo the clown who lives in Disneyland kidnapped me and did horrible things to me, and then the parents told the police, my kid said, or the police interviewed the kid, the police wouldn't start, looking in Disneyland for somebody called Funbo the Clown, right? They'd go,
Right.
okay, clearly this predator was lying to the child, and they'd start looking at other, using other techniques to investigate. I think the problem we have is, while I want to believe the experiencer as well, and I've certainly talked to enough over the years who I don't think they're lying to me, so many of the things that they talk about are based upon the phenomenon, whatever it is, or the phenomena, whatever it is, whether they're encountering a Bigfoot or UFOs or aliens or a ghost, or assuming that they're being presented with the truth. And we have traditions culturally and historically where we know not to trust the other. And the greatest example is fairy faith in Ireland, where
Right.
if you were in Ireland and you encountered the other, you'd already been taught, well, that fairy palace might really be a dank cave. That beautiful feast might really be a pile of manure. The gorgeous fairy maidens might really be old crones. But here we tend to live in a world where seeing is believing, right? So if somebody sees a grey alien, then it must have been a grey alien. If somebody sees a Bigfoot, it must have been a Bigfoot. But many of our older cultural traditions were far more careful as assuming that they were being told the truth. I'll say one more thing and then I'll throw it back to you. So that's something else I think people need to be aware of. The other thing is, and it's related, is when a witness that you trust, like an Air Force pilot, comes out and says, well, we were clocking this thing at Mach whatever and it was behaving in ways we could never explain, it's not one of ours. That Air Force pilot mightn't be lying to you, or fill in the blanks with any of these type of, reports of advanced technology.
Sure.
But just because that Air Force pilot doesn't know what that craft was, doesn't know that skunk works were 20 years ahead of what he's flying anyway, aren't experimenting with it. And he himself might have been experimented on. So I think there's this desire for us to believe people who are sincere, and we should believe people that they've had an experience. But those people might not be capable of even deciphering what the reality they were, what the reality they experienced was, whether it's misidentifying technology because you haven't read the latest Skunkworks report on, the new secret stealth technology they have, or whether you're somebody who experiences, an anomalous entity at the end of your bed that masks itself or presents itself or bounces off your expectations. You don't necessarily have to believe the experience to believe that somebody's experienced something. And I think that's good advice for anybody in the paranormal, anybody looking at any of these type of experiences, because it tends to be we're forced to either, well, you've got to believe the person or not. And if you don't believe the person, well, maybe you're a skeptic. It's sensible not to believe them. But if you're a believer, well, you're a horrible person because he's sincere or she's sincere. No. Just be wary of everything, because I think this whole field, the whole field of ufology, is a field of deception at every level, from the government through the phenomenon itself to the people who self-deceiving who experience it, to the whole community being self-deceived in this history that wasn't the history from 47. It was a history that was invented in the early 80s, which they've transposed back to 47. So the whole field is so filled with lies and confusion. So yeah, but I guess believe nothing. That's very negative, but that's it.
I get what you're saying, though. I mean, there's so much of what we think we know has been constructed for us, and that's something that I don't think people realize just how deep that actually goes. I mean, I think back to even stories like Kenneth Ring, who, when he experienced one of the first UFOs, and he described it one way, and then the newspaper printed that it was a flying saucer, and he didn't say flying saucer ever. And next thing you know, within a week, everybody was coming forward saying they were seeing flying saucers. Well, he never said that. So I think there's a lot of that goes on that we don't even realize we're doing. Like, I mean, I'm sure you and I do it. Like, I mean, we don't even realize just how much has been constructed, which brings me to the sort of the hypothesis of, which has been thrown around quite a lot in various discussions for the last little while, of Project Bluebeam, and the idea that there could be, or that somebody is behind some sort of false flag operation that would create some sort of alien invasion or something like that to just put the fear
Right.
of God into people. What's your take on Project Bluebeam? And just for the audience's of awareness, the idea of how Project Bluebeam has been discussed is that there could be a false flag event where the government basically manufactures some sort of alien invasion or alien encounter that promotes the idea that everybody should trust the government to get through whatever this horrific of so-called event is supposed to be. So what's your take on all of that?
I think the best illustration I've thought of why this is probably a thing is back in the days, back in the 80s, Ronald Reagan did a number of speeches where he talked about, this is during the Cold War, where he talked about, imagine if tomorrow there was a menace threatening the world from space, an extraterrestrial menace. Imagine how quickly we and the Soviets would come together to, fight this menace. Now, that doesn't mean Reagan was briefed or he knew anything, and certainly The Outer Limits had dealt with a story like that.
Independence
The
Day,
comic,
the movies, yeah.
exactly, the comic The Watchmen, although the movie did a different version, but The Watchmen had the antagonist in that movie invent an alien destruction of New York to bring the world together.
Right.
So it's been talked about multiple times. Why I think the Reagan speeches are significant is I can't imagine if he didn't say that there wouldn't have been people in US intelligence going, should we war game? And I'm not saying they might already have been wargaming this for years, but I can't believe if the president's making multiple speeches, people in the intelligence agencies who were obviously paying attention wouldn't have said, that's a good point. Or maybe
Right.
Reagan had been briefed alternatively, right? But
Yeah.
surely they'd start wargaming. What would happen if an alien threat appeared tomorrow? Incidentally, too, there's a book from the 1960s called Report from Iron Mountain, which now is generally regarded to be kind of a hoax. But one of the book was kind of as if there was this internal manuscript for, I guess, in the military-industrial complex, talking about things it had to do to maintain its power, in democracy. And one of the things talked about in a throwaway line in that book was, well, we could stage an alien invasion, right? Like, what if the aliens came? So I have zero doubt that it's been war gamed. I have zero doubt people have sat around thinking about, what if we did this? So that part, I would, if I had $1 billion and I could double it, I would make that bet. What the reality is of that actually being put into practice, I don't know. I do know if disclosure comes this year and all of a sudden we're told, yeah, the Zeta Reticulans are here and they're abducting people and I'll be like, I'm being blue beamed, baby. Like, this is not true, right?
Yeah, well, and I kind of wonder if that's exactly how the public is going to take it. I mean, I think at this point the public is so oversaturated with crisis because that's every single time you turn on Facebook or the news or whatever, that's what you've got in front of you. There's a crisis of something. And when they began to release the disclosure files, like, there was such a blasé lack of what is this now? Like, people aren't, there isn't this, it's not in every headline. It's not in the papers. It's not, it's just, it's like, oh, there's aliens. Yeah, that's nice. That's good. People are just kind of over it. And I kind of just, I wonder if Project Bluebeam, if that exists, if it went ahead, whether people would even notice, like, if they created some great big hologram of some alien ship in the sky, it was like, I feel like people would leave their house, wave at it, and go to work. Like, why are you guys here? Because, we don't want to be here. You want my job? They're going to have this attitude of like, I don't know. I don't know how people would react to it now compared to, say, like 10 years ago.
Jacques Vallée talked about that in some of his earlier books as well, if I recall. I think there was an incident in a battle in World War I, like maybe at Mons or somewhere, where in the sky there are angels and, these type of things. And I don't know if Vallée suggested that was a hologram or if he suggested that there'd be the potential to do that kind of thing to sway public belief. So Again, I mean, I would be suspicious even of my own eyes, as ridiculous as that sounds, because we know now, and AI makes it, more difficult to tell when images are released now. And forget even AI, a good Photoshop job, which would probably be done, like if somebody was going to really fake something, they probably just wouldn't run an AI program. They'd probably use After Effects or, Photoshop or, even more advanced image manipulation software. So I think the days of accepting photos are out. And video have totally disappeared. And I think, though, as you were mentioning, the idea of, a mass holographic projection, that probably also means even what we see with our own eyes, not to mention if the type of advanced technology, which I think they probably have already, and when I say they, I mean our governments. If you saw something that looked like a saucer hovering in the eye and then take off at ridiculous speed, it might even be a hologram. It might be, the next generation in, some, aeronautic technology we're unaware of. So maybe I should have added that one to the last one, as far as believing, don't believe anybody. Don't even believe yourself. That's a terrifying reality to live in, but that's the reality we live in.
Yeah, it's been so disappointing for me as a researcher that, everybody's now pumping out AI photos of Bigfoot and Dogman and spirits and this, that, and the other thing because I mean, that photographic evidence used to be one of those things that we could not necessarily count on, but it was a tool that we could analyze. It was something we could break apart and work with. And I mean, Steph, my business partner, she and I mean, we spent so many hours, breaking apart things like video cameras, trying to figure out like, how are these cameras working compared to other cameras so we could understand different types of footage and all of that's gone. Like it's gone. And the magic of going, oh my God, I think this person might have caught something. That's disappeared. Like because we can't tell anymore. And it's just, I don't know. It makes me a little bit sad to think that that's, unless you got it yourself,
Right.
and you can say, like, I know I caught this. It might not be meaningful to anybody else, but I know I've caught this thing. That's kind of all we've got. But anyway, this has been amazing. Dean, talk about your podcast. Where are people going to find you? Because I mean, you're talking about such awesome stuff all the time on your show.
Well, thank you, Morgan. I have a show called Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network, which is live every Thursday night, 9 p.m. US Central Time. And you can just find that by going to untoldradioam.com or find it on YouTube or Facebook or X. And it also drops on every podcast platform, I think on the planet, really. I don't think there's any we don't drop on. But to find it, you probably should look for Untold Radio because it's one of the shows there. If people are interested in my Shaver Mystery documentary or The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, which is the feature-length version of it, they can go to theshavermystery.com, but that at the moment will just take you to the Facebook page for The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, and that talks about my work in film and looking at this type of stuff. So again, on Facebook, just look for The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers or just type in your search engine, theshavermystery.com.
Yeah, if you guys want a wild ride, Richard Shaver, man, it is a wild ride, and it will blow your mind. Dean's been on this show before talking about it as well, so you can find that episode. But please go and check his work out because it will really shift your stance and broaden your world about the history of UFOs and where things have come from. Like it's such a incredible history lesson. So thank you so much, Dean, for doing this.
Morgan, thank you for having me on. It's always such a joy speaking to you, and I'm looking forward to talking to you on my show, the next episode of Talking Weird. So that's going to be great too.
Absolutely, and that will that'll be out, I think, by the time that this is out, because this is going to be out soon. So I think that will already be out, so people will be able to find it, and I'll throw it in the show notes so people can find it because this conversation isn't over. So we'll talk about more later. Part 2.
Thank you, Morgan.
I hope you guys really enjoyed that discussion, and I know it probably wasn't what you thought it was going to be. It's a really interesting subject matter that this presents to everybody, as researchers, as laymen, as people who are just wanting some semblance of truth and evidence behind this massive disclosure that seems to be going on all fronts, with the government, with supposed whistleblowers, all of this stuff. So I just really want people to keep an open mind and realize that not everything that you're being presented is probably the truth. To examine this evidence, and not to say it isn't, but I think examine this evidence with the same critical eye that you would if you were being presented this information from, anybody else. Be an investigator. Be a critical thinker. Piece through it. Think about it. Ask yourself if there's an agenda behind it. I think it's something that's just really important. And I'm not demonizing one government or another at all. I think both sides of the coin at this point, when you're dealing with this level of extraterrestrial information, it's going to be a very cagey, iffy subject. And what the public sees is probably not going to be anywhere near the extent of what they've actually got or what's coming out or anything like that. So I just want people to be mindful. Now, this discussion actually continued on Dean Bertram's Talking Weird, which I've got the link there in the comments that you guys can go and actually watch that conversation, where we actually talk about consciousness and what they call CE5 contact. And CE5 contact is the idea that aliens aren't little green men, that they're actually perhaps consciousness or extensions of consciousness that anybody can tap into. It's a really, really interesting discussion. And I had just had a blast on Dean's show. So, I mean, if you don't subscribe to Talking Weird, it's on the Untold Radio Network. Fantastic. He's got some incredible guests on, and our conversation was just so in-depth and cool. So check that out in the show notes. This has been awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this eerie expedition, my dear listeners. And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends. Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker, Paranormal Research and Teachings, and the 20th Plane. This podcast is a part of the Curious Cast podcast network. You can find out more about me, Morgan Knudsen, and book me for live appearances at entityseeker.ca. You can also email the show at supernaturalcircumstances.com.